All right, I know we didn't get to it a lot during class, so because we ran out of time, but you should have a paper plate. Your paper plate will look a little different than this, but you get the gist of it with the triangles and all the way around what we're calling right now the unit circle. You should have the same coordinates and the degrees and radians as you go around. This is a little smaller triangles than us. So your homework is asking you to identify what the sign of some of the different angles are. So I'm going to walk you through a few of them so you can kind of use this as a guide. So remember, if it says sine, cosine, or tangent, you're going back to your old SOHCAHTOA. And sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, tangent is opposite over adjacent. So you're going to go to whatever radian or degree they give you, and you're going to write down the opposite side over the hypotenuse from the triangle on your paper plate. So for pi over 6, and this one, there it is. It's an orange tab, a little orange triangle. Your triangle is a different color, but you should be able to find pi over 6. And the opposite side on pi over 6, again, there would be the triangle would be right there. I can kind of draw over top of it in green. It would be like this. And the opposite side is right here. It's 1/2. And so I would put over here, opposite side is 1/2. And the adjacent side, or sorry, the hypotenuse, these are unit circles, so the hypotenuse on every one of our triangles is 1, so that's 1/2 over 1. So the sign at pi over 6 is 1/2, which also at this point happens to correspond to the y-coordinate. So if I go to cosine of 3 pi over 4, here's 3 pi over 4 on my paper plate. That is right here. Yours looks a little bit better. I'm doing it in red because this is in red. So I want adjacent over hypotenuse. So again, the adjacent side for this angle, because that's our reference angle, and that's the one that matters, even though 3 pi over 4 is located over here, we're going to use the reference angle in our triangle. That's why we did the whole thing with reference angle. So the adjacent side is down here on the bottom, and that is, you can't see it because that is the wrong triangle. But up here you can see the coordinates, and you should have those. The adjacent side is the x value, which is negative rad 2 over 2. So that's where those coordinates are going to come in and help us. Negative rad 2 over 2. This is supposed to be a negative. Hypotenuse is still 1, so the answer would be negative rad 2 over 2. So that's where the positive and negatives are going to come into play, depending on which quadrant you land in and whether or not you're dealing with sine or cosine or tangent will indicate that. But there's, again, the coordinates, and those are your x value, which is the adjacent side in this case, and the y value is the opposite side. So last but not least, and I think some of your homework had some negative angles, so if I want to go to negative pi over 3, that would be this angle right here on this particular triangle. You go the opposite direction, and it corresponds with a positive 5 pi over 6. Sorry, I can't read very well. 5 pi over 3. The key is that the reference angle, again, is pi over 3, but I want the opposite side over the adjacent. So in this one, I'm not going to use that 1 because I don't care about the hypotenuse. So from this angle right here, the opposite side is rad 3 over 2. So I just write it just like you did back in good old geometry. These are just kind of fractions sometimes. The adjacent side is right here. That is 1/2. So I put a 1/2 in there. And again, notice now that is, in our case, that happens to be and that's going to be a negative rad 3 over 2. I just look down here at the coordinate, which is very important. Negative 3 rad 2. That is our y value over our x value. That'll come into play later. Well, negative rad 3 over 2 divided by 1/2 is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So what happens to us, and I can kind of show this a little bit more mathematically in class, those 2's cancel because dividing by 1/2 is the same as multiplying by 2. And those are gone. I'm going to scribble them out. So my final answer, even though it's the wrong color, is negative rad 3. And we're done. I hope that was good and gives you a little bit of help if you were stumped on some of those homework questions, and we will be covering this in much more detail in class. So don't worry too much.